Chaos. Woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning, chilling with coffee mugs, me and coffee chugs, talking education all across the nation, pushing boundaries, thinking innovation. Chaos.
Hello, everyone. How you doing? Welcome to another episode of Living on the Edge of Chaos podcast. I am here. I know I always say I'm really excited for this conversation. Even more excited as we were chatting right before we hit record. I think it's going to be a topic that a lot of us need to be probably questioning, having conversations with our own colleagues and leaders and things of that nature. And so I'm glad to bring some of this topic to light. And so I'm here with the incredible Mary Beth Hertz. So Mary, welcome to the show. And for those that don't know who you are and what you do, what do you got going on? Who are you? What you do? And you have a long laundry list of incredible things that you have done in your career. So I want to make sure everybody knows a little bit about who you are.
Well, thanks. I'm excited to be here. Agree about the conversation before we hit record. I think it's going to be a good conversation. So my name is Mary Beth Hertz, and I am an educator. I do wear a lot of hats. I've been working in K-12 education for almost 20 years. This is actually year 20 in Philadelphia. I've worked in public, neighborhood, elementary. I've worked in charter. I've worked in independent school. I've worked in I'm in a criteria-based high school right now. So lots of different places in education. And I've also been very involved in ed tech since I guess it was like 2008, 2009. And so this new world that we're in actually feels very familiar. But I teach kids visual art, so actual studio art. I also teach young people media and design, entrepreneurship, and also an intro to tech. We used to call it like a boot camp for ninth graders. So kind of just getting them ready for their high school career. So yeah, a lot of content area, a lot of hats, a lot of different things. But all about, basically using technology with students to help them create and explore and do cool stuff.
Yeah, I love that. And even as you're introducing yourself, it's most people probably now listening to the last few episodes know we're probably heading down the rabbit trail of AI, but I think in a slightly different tone. But even as as you're teaching visual arts and all that good stuff, it's a fascinating landscape, not just AI in and of itself, but we think about all the strikes and the things going on within the creation of art, whether that's movies or visual arts and painting. But then you think about usage of rights with tools like Midjourney or Adobe, and so I wasn't planning to start there, but I my brain's already cooking on that. I mean, I'm assuming you label yourself an artist, if you're within those things. How are you processing some of that? Because this, even though it feels like every time there's I'll call it a tech swing, a tech shift, there's many of those, we are in this place now that I think maybe feels a little bit different, where that whole idea of copyright, the usage of data, whether that's visual or text, whatever it might be, can be used faster and quicker and maybe more silent than ever before. And there's obviously lots of stuff happening in the courts right now, but how are you wrapping your head around that as you're thinking about teaching that, probably maybe some of your own work, and then also as a tech director and AI enthusiast / cynic, cautious optimism, where do you land in that?
Yeah, it's complex. And there's so many facets, right? So last year, all this stuff kind of hit the ground. When we came back from winter break, it was like, AI was accessible, right? Like it was publicly, I think it was November, right? I think is when OpenAI opened up Chat GPT. So, and DALL-E. So DALL-E was obviously as the art piece. So I actually did have my students, we did a Visions of the Future project. And so they actually used DALL-E to generate, they had to brainstorm on paper in their sketchbooks, 5 words that they thought described the future. And then they put those 5 words into DALL-E. So for those of you who don't know, DALL-E 2 is OpenAI's visual image generator using text. So they were able to generate AI images AI generated images based on their descriptors that they had defined about what the future was going to look like, be, include, whatever. And then they were able to use that as a jumping off point. We made collages. I printed them out and had let them like cut them out if they wanted to include them in their collage. But something that was interesting is when we got to the end, and that was, I think, like second quarter, I think, or second quarter. So
Right.
halfway through the year. At the end of the year, I did a project where they got to basically decide what they wanted to do. And they were allowed to use DALL-E 2 for brainstorming. So part of the project proposal was I would meet with each kid individually, and they'd have to show me what I called a preliminary sketch. For some kids, it was if they were doing digital art on the iPad, it was like an iPad thing. If it was a drawing or a painting, they would do a sketch, a sculpture, they would just kind of sketch out. And then some kids used DALL-E to create an idea, right? And it was, as an artist, sometimes you have these pictures in your head or you have these ideas, and it is helpful just the same way we use it for text, right? Sometimes we
Yeah.
want to get this brainstorming going to have that. And I love, my favorite term is just thought partner.
Mhm.
That's what I call these tools, as a thought partner. And as artists, like, what could that look like? And you can throw in, as to your point, right, those descriptors, like, I want it to look like a Van Gogh. I want it to look like a Seurat. I want it to look like, whatever or a O'Keeffe or like something like that, right? And so that's awesome because they may be your inspiration, because every artist has an inspiration, but it's also problematic, for two reasons. One, you could actually generate art that someone and then say that it's by this artist when it's not.
True.
That's the disinformation part. But also you run into the problem, like you were talking about, of like, artists don't get to say, right? They don't have a say on whether their art is used for. Now, every single person I just mentioned is dead. So they don't have a say anyway. But, for artists, these tools, I think, I don't know about ChatGPT, the newest version, but I know that the free one stops in 2021. So anybody has art up online until 2021, their art could be used to create new art, and there's nothing they can really do about it, especially since the scraping is happening on Reddit. DeviantArt, right? And DeviantArt had its own fiasco because it released an AI tool where it was going to scrape user images and everyone was like, well, what are you talking about?
Right.
So yeah, it's really complex. I don't have any answers. As far as opinion goes, I think there, like everything else that we're talking about with text-based stuff, it's the same thing, right? If I say write an essay in the style of, I don't know, some writer, right? Then that writer never said that someone could do that, right? And so, yeah, it's a definitely, I think the biggest takeaway for me is just like having those open, transparent conversations with kids, right?
Yeah.
That's what matters.
Right.
Having the answer doesn't matter. Knowing the answer doesn't matter. They ask me what I think, and I'll be honest and be like, don't know, guys. Here's where my thinking is, and here's like the thought process that I have. Some of them have really strong, had really strong opinions. But since some didn't, but yeah, so I think that there's valid arguments across the board, right?
Yeah.
I think that the creators have valid arguments, especially in the, with the SAG-AFTRA stuff with the generated actors, right? We'll pay you one time for your likeness, and then we'll just use it in perpetuity, right? Like,
Yeah.
wow.
Right.
Yeah, so it's complex, but I think it comes down to, having those conversations. And I think before we hit record, we were talking about some of the conversation you had with John Nash, and
Yeah.
you all were talking about academic integrity. And so I think there's a sense, the art world has its own integrity, right? And so, if you think about right now, I forget what the name of that Chinese company that's like mass producing stuff and selling it really cheap and basically like stealing people's, I can't remember the name, Shio? I can't remember. It was happening where, Urban Outfitters were stealing Etsy designs and then,
Yeah.
putting them up for sale. So I think there's nothing new about this conversation, the nuance is that the power is not siloed in these companies now. It's now in the hands of like every single living human being on the planet. Really great post I saw about this woman, I forget her role, but she was talking about how she saw this picture on Facebook and someone was like, look at this cute little baby peacock. And so she was like, oh, it's so cute, and shared it, and then found out her friend was like, yeah, that's not a peacock. And it turned out to be this like AI generated cutesy little picture of a peacock. But she had already shared it. And then she went down a rabbit hole of like using Google Images to find a picture of baby peacock. And that image was in Google Images
Oh, wow.
labeled as a picture of a baby peacock. So she was talking about this idea of she called it an oil spill, that like the oil has spilled and the companies have to she was using like Exxon and all these companies as of like look, we're trying to clean up the data, we're washing the little baby birds, right? But like but we were responsible for the spill in the first place, so we're trying to like save face by looking at we're going to clean up the baby birds, but we haven't owned the fact that like we just destroyed an entire ecosystem.
Right.
So I think, she was just talking about this fact that these companies have flooded these AI generation kind of flooded the internet and data with bad data. And how are we going to clean this up? Right? How are we going to clean up that spill? So it was a really interesting analogy. And I think the more we share those kinds of thinking about the transparency with our students, right? The more we share those kinds of experiences and share those kinds of things, I think the critical thinking piece, right, that has to happen is super important. But also, like, the woman has a PhD. Like, she's not that, for some folks that might not mean anything, but like, but I mean, she's a very, and she was saying that she's like, I'm a really like highly educated person, and even I shared this thing and was like, cute baby peacock, so I think and then even trying to find the truth was even like the stuff that she was finding was like random websites with horrible images just uploaded and labeled as baby peacock. So
yeah, I mean, it raises so many things as as you're sharing those stories. Like, it's not just an education issue. It's not just a tech issue. There is the ethics to it. There's morality. There's how do we even discern what's right or not? And I know I'll have to find the place to quote it, but I was really fascinated, like the psychology, and not to get into politics because I don't enjoy those conversations. But every time like the political like scene ramps up again, they talk a lot about the psychology of like the first people to spew out information has the biggest impact, even if it's not correct. Even if you go back and then say, oh, that wasn't accurate, actually here's the what the real fact was, the brain still processes that first piece even if the other it's been corrected. And so I'm thinking through like all these things that are out there. I mean, misinformation on the web is not a new concept, but the way in which we can harness and get this information now with all these AI tools is just a whole nother layer to what was already things we were trying to figure out that maybe we just kind of gave up on and looked the other way. But now I think it's like front and center in a lot of different things for a lot of different reasons. I say it jokingly, but it's not really a joke. I mean, I think to me, AI has just really reminded us how much we are a product. We're definitely not as much in control as we like to think, and maybe to build off that thought, I know you recently, and I know you've got other stuff in the works, put together some really great graphics as we're kind of talking here about ethics and policies and just the different things as people are dabbling and trying to figure this stuff out and learn from it. And there's a lot of voices out there, in these fields. And so you've put together some really great visuals and resources really around that idea of like ethics and policies, which hasn't been discussed as much as maybe it should be, especially with the start of a new school year. Again, probably almost a little bit like you said earlier. I don't know that there's perfect answers yet, but starting off with some of those conversations to at least get the gears turning. I'll put a link in the show notes for people to check it out. But as you've been curating this, you put time into a really, really great Canva document there. What sparked that? What got you to that point? Not just to read, but to curate this. And I'm sure, knowing you've got more coming down the pipeline. But what's got your wheels turning when it comes to these, like the ethical and the policy side of AI?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll start with like kind of something I mentioned in the beginning of the show when I was talking about my background, is that, I was in the classroom, and I was teaching in a computer lab when Web 2.0 came out. And everybody was so excited.
Oh
We
yeah.
can interact with the internet, right? Or we're going to have our kids blogging. We're going to make them email addresses. We're going to have them chatting. We're going to have them like doing all this stuff. And it was super exciting and super disruptive, in the innovation world, right? And everybody was just jumping on this technology bandwagon. And, lo and behold, we find out what these companies were doing with our students' data, right? I have like serious guilt over how many times I did all this stuff, and just like, and even just the digital footprint that we had our kids, right? Putting this stuff up publicly. We were so excited, authentic audience, right? Like, and then it turned into walled gardens, and then it was, so it's definitely, it's very reminiscent of that, where we've got this shiny new toy and look what it can do. And a lot of what I see is that, right? I see a lot of that. And it's not wrong, right? None of it's wrong. There is so much potential. There's so much awesome stuff. And I do have in the resources that you mentioned, kind of like this is the potential, but like, of those potentials, here's are the things we should be thinking about. So, I'm not going to go all doom and gloom, but I think we have a place we can learn from, right? We have an experience that many of us in this world of ed tech went through. And so, the ethical implications of what we're doing with data, to me, are like the big thing, because like literally that's all these things are, right? They're data scrapers.
Yeah.
And to your point before, about, disinformation and misinformation and all that, it's like these tools are fed, and some of them are live on the internet, right? So it was a Bard, I guess, right, is like scraping the live internet. So if there's fake images out on the internet and you do a query and you talk to this chatbot, it could feed you the fake images that it made. So now we're in this place where we're also putting so much garbage out there, but the tools we're using are using that garbage to learn.
Yeah.
So it's and so I guess I think on the peacock, baby peacock post, because I saw it on LinkedIn, one of my things, or maybe I saw it on Threads, it might have been on Threads, but all the places. So I think, my thought was just like teaching, because digital literacy is one of the things I teach, like, digital literacy, media literacy, all that kind of stuff. It's going to be exponentially harder, right?
Yes.
Like how do we, I don't want to say combat this. It's not a war. Education is not a war, but I think it's like, what do you, there's only so much you can do in some ways, right? And I think we need to be realistic.
Yeah.
But we have to do something, right? We have to address this head on. Like, we have to talk about it. We can't ignore it. Like, I think to your point, at some point, I don't know, it was before recording or during recording, about like people being ready for this stuff, right?
Yeah.
There is no being ready. There's no waiting until you're ready.
Exactly.
There's learning and understanding and doing the best you can, and being open and transparent, and doing that with adults and also with young people. Because if we don't, we're going to run into the same problems we have with social media, where kids got on social media with no guidance. I used to use the playground metaphor, right? We don't send kids off on the playground without teaching them about safety and about bullies and about how, and like, being safe on the playground. But with social media, we gave them this playground and we just kind of ignored it, and like, and stayed out of that space. And now we're in a place where, in, social media and how kids are navigating it hasn't really gotten that much better.
No.
So, I think that same metaphor of like, okay, the kids are going to use it. We can't ignore the fact they're going to use it. How are we supporting them through that process? And how are we also understanding that there's no way we can control how they use it, right? You can't control it, and cheating, whatever. And we talked about a little bit about that before, right?
Yeah.
Kids using it for kids, and I say kids and adults using it for, ways that are have less integrity is going to happen. But how do we support, people, and even teachers, right? Understanding their use of the tools, and how they maintain their own integrity as creators and thinkers and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, and there was something else I was thinking, but I'll stop rambling.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, you hit on such some really key points. I think, that the heart of any educator, really wants the best for their kids, and we want to try to control as much as we can in that positive light, in terms of like, we want our kids to be safe and protected. And we've been through this gauntlet time and time again, and we're not out of the gauntlet with social media by any means, but now we're throwing AI into all those tools, and then AI in general. I think about, we were working with some administrators in one of our policy kind of workshops this, and really the bigger thing that came out was like, now they have to go create a policy now, but holy cow, do we have a lot of learning to do. And to me, that was like one of the biggest ahas that I wanted to take away for people, to realize like, we've got learning to do before we can start putting in different things of what we're going to block or not block, or allow or not allow. Doesn't mean you still can't, you need to get up to code on age limits and what the data is doing. That stuff is crucial, but there is something here that needs to be done with that. And so the one place we were talking through, they're like, we're going to do this and that, we're thinking this. And I'm like, but do you, like, what's your cell phone policy? Well, secondary ed, kids can have cell phones. I'm like, so then the policies, I didn't say this out loud, but really become ineffective, because if I have my
Right. I
own
just go on
data
the app
and
on
I
my
have the
phone.
app,
Yeah.
you know what I
Mhm.
mean? So there's this bigger call for this digital citizenship, and we've always been working on that. I don't know how well it's been better in some places than others, but now it's not just for the sake of education. It's, I mean, this sounds so like cheesy utopian, but like for the sake of humanity, because it's going to be infused in everything. So how do we help ourselves learn how to discern what is going on and what's being perceived? And I shared, like, even on Instagram, I don't know what the company is. I'll put a link so people can check it out, but they have like an influencer that's estimated to make $10 million this year, and she's not even real.
Mhm.
She's virtual, but she looks real. And I'm just like, that to me, you compound that with all the influences of social media. Now they're going to be influenced by whatever the algorithms these companies have access to, that sometimes know ourselves better than we know ourselves, is to me a little alarming. And I like AI, I like tech. Like, most people see me as, like, oh man, he loves it. But I also have that fear of like, holy cow, what's that mean for my kids? And
Yeah, I mean,
so,
mental health wise, right?
oh
Like, you
geez.
already have, I mean, I actually, fun fact, I tell my students this, I don't go, it's funny, when Threads opened up, I stopped, I have Instagram. I had an Etsy shop it's still there, but I don't have time for it anymore. But so I had an Instagram, but like, I don't go on Instagram because it makes me feel like crap.
Yeah.
It makes me feel like my life is boring, and don't have the right this. So my kids don't do cute. My kids don't do that. And so I was
Yeah.
like, what is going on in my head? So I don't go on there because it just makes me feel less than.
Yeah.
And I'm not even worried about the beauty standards, right? Like, I'm over that.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
too old
right.
to care about beauty standards. Okay, being over 40. Um, but I think that, just the filters were bad enough, right? Now
Yeah.
you've got AI generated influencers that are like perfect, and there's actually, it's fascinating. This is a side note, but there's a guy that I see post on LinkedIn all the time, and which is where I'm getting most of my information these days, which
Same,
is
same.
crazy. But he actually tries to code imperfections into his AI portraits, and like, it won't do it.
Hmm.
So he'll post these generated images and text prompts, and say like, he like tried to make imperfections, and then he points out the imperfections in the generated images to show that the tool did it, but like, if he didn't point it out, you would be like, that's a beautiful model.
Right.
And so it goes back to kind of what we're talking about, mental health wise. First of all, like if the AI itself isn't able to produce images that aren't, quote unquote perfect,
Right.
but then these AI tools are integrated into these apps now. So I can use AI to change my appearance, right? And I can use and it won't ever show potentially my anything that's quote unquote wrong with me.
Yeah.
But yeah, and there was something else that you were saying that I lost my because you were talking about the learning piece, right? Because you were talking about how we have so much to learn.
Right.
And I think the learning piece is important because nobody is an expert in any of this. Like I'm going to be doing a workshop or like a kind of like course. It's not something I can offer to the public. It's for another company, but it's they may offer it to the public, but it's focused on AI. But one of the people I'm doing it with is like literally builds with large language models. That's his job.
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't know how it works. It's like, I don't, on the inside, like a lot of what you read is that even the people building them are like, well, that's cool, So I think part of what I do in my class with my ninth graders at the boot camp I was talking about is I start off with how the internet works.
Yeah.
And like, what is a packet? And what is an IP address? And and thank God for code.org. I hope they never take those videos down because they have
No
a bunch
doubt.
of really great videos with like Vint Cerf. Like
Yeah.
I said, I'm like, Vint Cerf is still alive. Like, dude made the internet. That's how young the internet is, right? And so, so I think the what's that saying about how the sausage is made, right? So I think part of what we didn't understand back in 2008, 2009 was how the sausage was made, right? We didn't actually understand the technology behind. And so what I can do by starting off the year with how the internet works is then when we talk about passwords and privacy and hacking and all this kind of stuff, cookies, right, tracking, like all this stuff, they have a framework of like, oh, right, the computer has an IP address, and so it knows my IP address and it can track me based on that, and the IP address is what's attached to the data packets. It's going to the servers, and like it sounds really technical. It's not that hard to understand on a basic level, but it really helps you understand when I click a button, it's not freaking magic.
Right.
Like it's a thing that's like a process that's decades and decades and decades old and hasn't changed. And so to your point about the learning, I think the bare minimum we can do is understand that these things gobble data and that the data that they're gobbling can be problematic. And then they spit us out problematic stuff. And so, but also like they have gobs and gobs of data, and yeah, they can save us time, right? Because so it's like this double-edged sword, right? I mean, I'm not gonna lie, ChatGPT wrote my rubrics last spring. ChatGPT wrote me all kinds of stuff because stuff that would have taken me 3 hours to pull together took me 20 minutes.
Right.
Like it's great. But I changed it, right? It would spit something out and it'd be like, it's almost there, kind of like a chef adding like a little bit more salt to the stew or whatever, right? Like because I'm a highly trained educator with a lot of experience, I can look at something it spits out and be like, it's not quite there yet, right? So I think that humanity piece, that human piece, at least for now, is still really, really important. But I think that learning piece is so important, even if it's just understanding the bare minimum of how these tools work. And even like, I mean, even at this day and age, there's still people who don't understand how the internet works.
No.
They don't. And so and I think that that's, still kind of crazy, but maybe I care more than most people about that kind of stuff for obvious reasons. But yeah, I think that is the bare minimum we can do, is to just at least understand what these things are doing and how they work, and that they're not like, maybe they do feel like magic, even to the people working on them, but that they're not, that there's a basic function there of how they work.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it goes back to, the phrase you used back at the beginning of the show, like the way you're using those tools is as a thought partner. I mean, that's what I find myself using it quite a bit is I don't always have an office. I may not always be surrounded by people to bounce ideas off of. And so a lot of times I find myself more and more, I'll be working on something and then I'll throw it into Chat GPT, and I'll just have it like almost like debate me, like push back on my ideas, like, and am I able to not defend my thoughts, but am I able to articulate back what I'm thinking? And if I can, then I realize, maybe I'm not quite ready to then share this out because I actually can't speak to it. I don't know as much as what I do need to know, or just, looking for the gaps in my own thinking, that kind of stuff I have found, really fascinating. And I'll put a link in the show notes too. There's a course on LinkedIn, on the LinkedIn Learn. I can't think of the name off the top of my head. It was one I was kind of searching through, and there's some popular ones, but this guy had a short video segment on what general intelligence is. And then he explained how the AI works. And really what his point was, like, it's actually not smart. I mean, I mean, we can get into like the tokens and it just generates and kind of chains letters together. But it's like if you play chess, like a human that plays chess, that's good at it is smart. Like they understand, they're calculating, they're moving through. But like an AI, like it could beat you every time, but it doesn't even know that it's actually playing chess. It doesn't even like
Right.
it's just following whatever the next. It's just pattern recognition, but it doesn't know, like that it's chess and there's someone across the table. And so there's this interesting thing of like what it can do to expedite work, just like you talked about, but it's, I don't know, not necessarily intelligent, even though it kind of feels like it is.
Mhm.
So it's all, I don't know. Every time I jump on LinkedIn or check my email and read the latest newsletters, it's like, oh man, I got so much to learn.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I love the, the idea of people being AI experts and like experts in this and experts in that. And I think it's, I mean, I first of all, like I would never say I'm an expert in anything, no matter how good I was at something. I think that's a very finite way to define yourself.
True. Yes.
But it is, yeah, I mean, it's definitely, it's everywhere. And I guess what putting my educator hat on and beginning of the school year, I do worry about principals, school leaders, superintendents who are crunched for time and will just be like, this person's an AI expert, right? I'm going to bring them in. And, I don't know that an AI expert understands the nuance of education. I also
Yes.
think like an AI and education expert, I'll be frank, I don't see a lot of people talking about the data and the privacy, right? There's a
Oh
lot of
no.
like, ChatGPT will save you all this time and you can use it for making lessons and doing all this, but like, there's not a lot of conversation about like what student data you're putting into the tool, or what personal identifying information are you putting in the tool? Is the information you're putting into the tool being used to train the model, which means that it's basically other people are going to be able to access what you put in there, which in education with all the FERPA and HIPAA laws, like, I mean, you're talking about people losing certifications if
Yeah.
like you really screw
Yeah.
that up. There
Right.
are some tools that, one of my things is I'm at the point now where I don't sign up for any of this stuff until I've read the privacy policy. And sometimes I sign up even though I'm like, just because I just bite the bullet. But as far as, I have the good, I guess the good news is I have seen a few tools out there where they make a point of discreetly explaining what they do with PII, or even the language which you should be seeing in privacy policies. If you don't see it, run for the hills. What happens if our company is bought by another company, right?
Yeah.
What happens to your data? So I think, especially when we work with student data, that is like, because that is the American way. We buy
Yep.
little people
Yes. Yes.
to make ourselves richer. Sorry, I won't get the get to politics in here. But I think in ed tech, that happens so often, right? Little,
Oh
was
my
it
God.
Lego just bought? Was it Kahoot? Did they just buy?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so, so yeah, I think, one of the things that really and this all started, I think you asked me the question about the resources and why I got into the resources. And part of it is because, to the learning point, there's so much going on and it's been like floating around in my brain. And sometimes the only way I can make sense for myself is to organize it. And, why not share that?
Yep.
So really it was kind of a selfish endeavor to be, because I feel like I can't express what I'm thinking or what my approach is or my thoughts are unless I take that time to concretely put them together. But something that I felt really important putting in there is this, I don't know if it's just like a pretty graphic organizer, but it's a way to think about your approach to these tools as you go back into school. And in the middle is this shared values.
Yeah.
So I think what I hope doesn't happen is people so there's a new disruption coming in. We have to change what we're doing to meet the disruption. That's one way of doing it, which I think may be an approach folks are looking at. But there's also this idea of there's this disruption coming in. How do we use our shared values to approach how we handle the disruption? We don't need to necessarily change anything. We might like, the idea of like, a lot of talk about how we have to rethink how we assess, right?
Yep.
So there may be some places, but in the end, as a school community, we should have some kind of shared value around assessment, right? So
Yes.
even if we have to change how we assess, the whys of assessing and the ethos we have around assessing, that's there. So all it means is that we have to rethink the how, not the why. And
Yes.
so, so I hope that, whether it goes around, because your point with the cell phones, yeah, I mean, does your cell phone policy should already address the fact that like kids could be, I mean, like, how do I put this gently? Like kids who can afford fancy technology will always have the upper hand.
Yeah.
My kid's using a Chromebook versus my kid's using a MacBook at home. So they have a kid who only has their school issued Chromebook has access to way less stuff, right? Than a kid who's got like a PC at home that has like Adobe Creative Suite, right?
Yep.
So I think that's that. I say that to say that like those things have not changed, right? A kid who's going to have access to a paid ChatGPT account versus a kid who's going to be using the one for free, right? There's also that piece. Or can afford Midjourney, right? Where Midjourney is not, I mean, it's free, but barely.
Right.
So I think what I hope folks do is really take the time, and this is something that I think all schools have had to do with the pandemic, right? It's like, who are we? What are we doing? What is our approach? Because if the pandemic didn't force your school community to have those conversations, you need to have them.
Yeah.
Now, definitely. So I think that's something I'm interested in going back into the school year, is having those conversations with my colleagues, but centering them on who we are as a school community, and also like not coming at it from a place of fear, but coming at it from a place of inquiry and coming at it from a place of reflection and maybe some revisiting of things and processes and things. But in the end, it should always come back to like who we are, who we stand for, and how we work with kids. The kids really need to be, in the center as far as the choices that we make. And sometimes the kids might not like those decisions, but if we it's like, as a parent, you're like, I'm doing this because I care about you, right? And they're like, I hate you, Mom, right? But like, maybe 20 years from now, they'll be like, man, Mom was right.
That's right. That's right.
So it may mean revisiting our cell phone policy and parents being upset, or it may mean that we have to send a letter home to families saying like, and we might have to choose in our community, does opt in for ChatGPT make sense, or does opt out make sense, right? We have to know our community of what our community is about. And I say that because ChatGPT, you have to be 13, but if you're 13, if you're under 18 and 13 or older, I don't know what. Yeah, you have to have parental permission. So how do schools navigate that? And you have to know your community, and you have to understand your community to be able to make those decisions and understand yourself, right? As a school community.
Yeah. Well, I think, as we may be respectful of your time here. I'm so glad you brought up this last point, because I think it's something that I've been trying to figure out how to properly articulate, and I haven't quite nailed it yet. But what I see with the AI is, yes, there's some conversations that need to be had, and it gets us thinking about the data, the privacy, some of these things that have maybe we've been a little too lackadaisical on when it comes to like our Chrome extensions and different apps and things of that nature. But it does bring a wonderful opportunity to start to bring IT and tech people into the fold of the conversation of what's happening in the classroom. Sometimes in districts, though, they work silently, they don't cross pollinate, and there's a great opportunity for people to be able to really dive into that work and feel like they can truly make an impact in the classroom. I know they do, but sometimes those worlds don't always come together.
The siloing is real. Yeah.
And then the other thing that comes as you're talking through that is, to me, the AI is giving us another opportunity. Like you said, it's not changing our why, but COVID kind of just land blasted everybody and forced us to really kind of figure some things out. Here we are now with an AI layer to the world, and are our actions actually following our words? And here's a good opportunity, I think, to really dive and spend more time on that human side as we go back and look at this stuff. Is our assessment truly doing what's best for kids? Is the way we teach truly what's in the best interest of kids? And we try for that, but now here's this another kind of disruptor that's here. Are we actually doing that, or do we need to start put more focus on that versus which tool is going to catch kids for cheating? Let's spend less time on that and more on where's the engagement, the inquiry, and the strategies that, if the tools are there or not, they're not going away. Kids will find a way to use
AI
them.
proof teaching.
Yeah. So it's I think it's you hit on a really key point there as we go through. And so could talk to you for another 2 hours. You've got such great insights, and I'll share your resource and your stuff in the show notes. But as we wrap up here, if people want to follow you and learn more from what you're thinking and putting together and all the stuff you've got going on, where are some of the best places to follow you and find you?
So I am on LinkedIn as Mary Beth Hertz. So just my name. And the back end is just my name. If you're looking at the URL, but you can also look me up. And then on basically everywhere on social media, I'm at MB Teach. So MB Mary Beth and Teach MB Teach. Not MB Teachers. That's a Manitoba Teacher Society. But I get lots of fun followers.
Oh, I bet
that way. But yeah, so I'm trying to think. My website, marybethhertz.me, is just kind of a landing place, but happy to connect with folks.
Well, I appreciate you having this conversation with me. It's been an absolute blast, and like I said, we could probably chat through a whole nother hour on these topics. And so I'm excited to continue to follow you. Anybody listening in, and follow you, Mary Beth, as well, because she brings a great insight and perspective to all this stuff as we all head back to school and try to navigate what's coming our way. But I think one of the key things is to continue to have these conversations and start to build some awareness, because I don't think the awareness is there as much as it maybe needs to be, but it's going to come full throttle here for everybody if you're not back at school yet, once school starts up. So I appreciate the conversation and the insights and time today.
Thanks so much, Aaron, for having me. It was really fun.
Hey y'all. Woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning, chilling with coffee mugs, me and coffee chugs, talking education all across the nation, pushing boundaries, thinking innovation. Chaos.